So I've read the editor's introduction. It's really interesting. Um, there's been the book was posthumously produced from a collection of notes discovered after his death, I think. But they had even been used in previous works before. But there was in this collection of notes, there was apparently enough evidence to believe that Nietzsche had been thinking about a book called The Will to Power. And it was from that which his sister, after he died, his sister collected his notes together into a book called The Will to Power. And there's a very charming little anecdote about one of the phrases which his sister had thought was which his sister was somewhat enamored. And let's see if I can find it. Yes, here's a bit. What needs to be said about the standard arrangement followed in the present translation, I said in my Nietzsche in 1950. It was this. To arrange the material, Frau Forster-Nietzsche chose a 4-line draft left by her brother and distributed the notes under its 4 headings. Nietzsche himself had discarded this draft, and there are a dozen later ones, about 25 in all. But none of these were briefer than this one, which listed only the titles of the 4 projected parts, and thus gave the editor the greatest possible freedom. It was only the draft which suggested Zucht und Zuchtung, that the title of part 4 and Frau Forster-Nietzsche may have been charmed by these words, although her brother, as we shall see, did not consider breeding a function of race. His own attempt to distribute some of his notes among the 4 parts of a later and more detailed plan was ignored, as was the fact that Nietzsche had abandoned the entire project of The Will to Power in 1888. Moreover, so on, we talk about other parts of Nietzsche's books. Nietzsche got a reputation for being a proto-Nazi. To be sure, there's an old translation done by Anthony M. Ludovici for the complete works of Friedrich Nietzsche, edited by Dr. Oscar Levy, originally published in 1914. The 2 volumes of The Will to Power are revised afresh by their translator for the edition of 1924 and reprinted without further revision in 1964. Dr. Levy was probably quite right when in a prefatory note he called Ludovici the most gifted and conscientious of my collaborators. But unfortunately this does not mean that Ludovici's translations are roughly reliable. Even in the revised version, the heading of section 12, for example, refers to cosmopolitan values instead of cosmological values. Let us say that Ludovici was not a philosopher and let it go at that. It would be pointless to multiply editorial notes in order to catalogue his mistranslations, but as long as we shall never mention him in the notes, one other example may be permissible. Section 86 begins, Your Henrik Ibsen has become very clear to me. Evidently confusing deutlich and Deutsch, Ludovici renders this, in my opinion, Henrik Ibsen has become very German. And it ends, he says, even in this introduction, Nietzsche should have the last word. So I shall conclude by citing one of his drafts for a preface, not included in any previous edition of The Will to Power, but found in the Musarian edition of the works. volume 14, page 373, written in the fall of 1885. The Will to Power. A book for thinking, nothing else. It belongs to those for whom thinking is a delight, nothing else. That it is written in German is ultimately, to say the least. I wish I had written it in French. Oh dear, sorry.